It is these millions of little micro decisions that we make over and over and over, which either take us further away from ourselves or bring us closer back to ourselves.
Erika, Gerdes, how are you doing?
Hi, thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
It's really wonderful to for you to be here on the show. I'm really excited to talk about authenticity, talking about individuality through your lenses because you are a former Google business executive, spent many years there, and you've taken a different route now towards understanding a little bit of who we are and what we strive to be and how to be our authentic selves. So I'm excited to hear from you what that really means to you and how you help others achieve that.
Awesome. I'm very excited to talk about it. It's a topic that is incredibly close to my heart and certainly what I have devoted my life to.
Wonderful. So authenticity. Talk to me a little bit about what does authenticity mean?
So the challenge with authenticity is it's one of those cliched terms, and like so many of them in this industry of self improvement or personal development, we don't really know what it actually means. So the way I define authenticity is the practice of letting go of who we think we need to be and embracing who we truly are. Because I really believe that when we embrace who we actually are, we're able to have much greater impact in on our communities, on our families, and on the world around us.
So just as as a young entrepreneur myself, and I'm always looking at different startups and different products, and I'm thinking of that now as a product of how to help one become more authentic. And it starts always with a pain point, right? What is the problem that you're trying to solve? So I'd love to hear a little bit about your journey and how you transitioned from your work in the workforce to understanding that there is a problem that perhaps people are not as authentic as they could be.
To your point, I was my biggest pain point, and I experienced this sort of emptiness inside of me almost all of my life. I called it the void. Some people call it like a black hole or just an emptiness in the pit of their stomach. And I thought I was alone in that feeling. And I thought that the best way for me to overcome that experience was to do more, achieve more, be more. And so it led me to basically a lifetime of collecting gold stars and doing everything I thought I needed to do in order to be the best. And in seeking perfection, I completely lost myself. And what I really began to realize is that perfect wasn't even good enough. I mean, and it wasn't just perfect in my job, it was perfect in all parts of my life. I needed to be the perfect wife, the perfect mother, the perfect employee, the perfect homemaker, like all of the things. And in doing so, I was putting out so many fires. I didn't realize I was the one getting burned over and over and over again. And the pivot point in my life, because I think every good hero's quest has an inciting event. And mine was that when my second daughter was born, she was born with a tumor on her spinal cord, which we didn't know about until she was 2 weeks old, and it required that she have a 7-hour spinal neurosurgery when she was 3 months old, which was so far off of any plan that I had developed for how my perfectly curated life was supposed to go, that it made me take a deeper look at my life. She is okay. She will have to have other surgeries in her life, but I'll skip ahead to that in case I forget. But while I was in the hospital, I had a thought that changed my life. And the thought was, I have one life to live. There are no second chances, no do overs. I get one go round at this life. Why would I spend one more minute waiting to be happy? And what I realized was I was in my 30s. I had already been at Google for I don't know, 9 years at that point, something like that. And I didn't feel like I was living my life. I felt like I was living somebody else's life. And I had to start getting really, really honest with myself about how and where and why I was going through the motions in all parts of my life, and start making changes that enabled me to get closer to who I truly am. And it's not something that you make in one decision. That's why I call it a practice, because we don't lose ourselves or find ourselves or make changes with any one grand decision. It is these millions of little micro decisions that we make over and over and over, which either take us further away from ourselves or bring us closer back to ourselves. And so that's what I teach now, is how to listen more deeply to what's missing and how we can begin to find it for ourselves so that we can begin to embrace who we are and what we truly want in our lives.
So what was the most difficult part of making that tangible transition? So I understand the mindset that you're entering this, and you're sort of you're accumulating this inner understanding that you're not necessarily fulfilling your true potential for happiness, and then there's a trigger in your life, an adversity that triggers it and makes you realize that, okay, maybe I should do something about it. But what, so how does that actually happen, that transition to do something about it?
With a lot of crying. um, I know. I think the transition requires, we have to get to a place where we realize that we can't just keep being okay with okay. And I know so many high achievers and overachievers who, you'll ask how they're doing. They're fine. Everything's fine. First world problems. I have nothing to complain about.
Right.
And when we do that, we're really ignoring some deeper yearning inside of ourselves that doesn't do us or the world a service in talking about how fine everything is. Yes, it may be first world problems, but if we ignore those things, we could actually, if we were to actually pay attention to those things, we could solve a lot of third world problems by actually paying attention to the yearnings in our heart and our souls. And I believe that each of us has the capability of changing the world, but we can only do that when we start by changing ourselves.
Right.
And so for me, that change required getting really, really honest with myself about why I was stuck, what I was holding on to. And the iteration for me included first, I ended up leaving my marriage because I realized it was never going to be what I needed it to be. And I had become such a different person in order to be married that as I became more myself, it just didn't work anymore, which was on me. And then I started getting honest with myself that while I loved Google, I mean, I was a preeminent Google cheerleader. I was always at Google. They have interviews that are like a Googliness interview,
Yeah.
which is literally determining how googly you are. It was always me. Like I can nail googliness from a mile away. I love Google, and I consider myself. I graduated from there. I didn't leave there because I really did love it, but I found something that for me I loved more, and that
Wow.
was helping make a difference in people's lives. And so it was incredibly hard for me to leave. And it has been the most rewarding journey and transition I've ever made in my life. Also the hardest.
Right. It sounds like a very positive transition, but I have to grasp, because there seems to be a fine balance between when this transition happens, right? Because one of the things that happened as I transitioned into my college education, and I came into a university older than most of my peers. I was 24, most of them were 18. I had commanded previously teams in the Israel Defense Forces, and when I came in and people were asking, I remember the first occurrences. I was riding my bike and somebody was riding past me, and they screamed, "How you doing?" And I thought to myself, and then they continued. They didn't. I couldn't even have time to respond. And I started seeing this more and more often, that people are asking questions about how you're doing, but they're either not waiting for answers, or the answers that they gave me when I asked them truthfully, they're very on the surface, and that made me think about the society, sort of, and this sort of the race that you're describing to become the perfect self. But on the other
Hmm.
hand, without striving and without sometimes doing, as we're growing up, things that we don't necessarily enjoy, we can't get to be an executive at Google, right?
Yeah.
So how does that so
Yes.
how does that balance work? And at what point in your life do you have to become more authentic versus just going along with what the society is telling you?
Well, I think that we're always at a crossroads at every point in our lives to make a decision between holding on to good and safe, or letting go of that and going after what is great and true and authentic for our lives. And most of us never make that choice to go toward what's great because it requires letting go of safety. It requires letting go of certainty. It requires letting go of our comfort zone and walking without any guarantees straight into the fog of the unknown. And that's incredibly scary. Um, so the younger we are, while yes, we tend to be more risk tolerant to a certain extent when we're younger, most of us are still very insecure with ourselves. We're still trying to figure out who we are, just at any level, whether it's surface or deeper. So for me, I don't think it could have happened earlier. I mean, there were so many opportunities before I actually decided to go down this road, that I just didn't take those opportunities because I just wasn't ready for them. But I also really believe that everything that we experience is intended to prepare us for what is to come. So all those previous times where I chose good instead of great helped motivate me, because I learned over and over and over again, I choose good, I don't feel good. It's comfortable, or at least it's known, but it doesn't feel good. It just feels empty, or it feels hollow, or it feels surface, as you said. It doesn't feel rich and rewarding and full. And when I experienced it enough times, I realized I don't I don't want to live a life that by the end of my lifetime I look back and think, meh, that wasn't so bad. I want to look back and have it have been an adventure. Know that I really experienced full range. And full range, what I've discovered is, I thought when I started on this journey that full range meant not being locked into a marriage or a job that was holding me back or keeping me down. That's not what full range is at all. Full range is about being able to feel everything, experience life fully, which means all the joys and all the fears, all the happiness and all the pain. And when we know that we can do all of that and we will be okay no matter what, we're not guarding ourselves from those experiences. We're throwing
Right.
ourselves into them. And
Right.
that's what I hope for everybody, because so many of us stay on these incredibly narrow paths, just doing the same things over and over again, whether it's in a personal relationship or a professional job. And it's because we're too afraid of, will we be able to actually make it if we let go of this and go towards something else? And when we start to realize we're going to make it no matter what, we are going to be okay, even
100%.
if it means risking everything, that's when we get to really truly live and have impact.
So you leave the high intent the very intensive job that you had at Google, and now you're helping others achieve their authentic potential. So what does that actually mean? What do you do on a day-to-day basis that is helping others go through a similar journey that you went through?
I So my favorite thing at Google was building relationships and deepening connections and establishing trust. It's what I've always been really sort of innately good at, and that's exactly what I get to do all day, every day. Is listen to people and hold space for them to be really honest and vulnerable. I mean, there aren't a lot of people in our lives. If you think about, how much of the time do you feel like you can truly be vulnerable around somebody? It's not very often.
Right.
And to be able to give people the space and the gift of allowing them to feel really safe being vulnerable is in and of itself a great gift. And when we allow ourselves to be vulnerable and like expose the fear and talk about the stuff that we don't ever want to say out loud to anybody because we think, oh my God, what are they going to think about me? They're going to run for the hills. Or um, then we start to realize that stuff is actually they're just fear stories. They're not real. And when we can bring those things to the surface instead of like ignoring them or denying them or pretending they don't exist, then they stop having as much power. And when we can take the power away from those deeper things that keep us stuck, we're so much more free to take action and make a bigger impact in our lives. And so that's what I do, is I really help people identify what those, some people call them limiting beliefs. I think they're deep. They tend to be deeper than that. I call them fear stories. And most of us don't even know that, they're playing out over and over and over and over in our
Right.
lives and over and over and
In
over in
our
our
micro
head.
decisions, right? Not just in the grand scheme.
Exactly.
It's in the day-to-day things, the thousand decisions we make every minute.
Exactly.
Right. So how do you
Yeah.
help people go through that understanding? So it sounds like it's not just a nice a 1 hour Zoom call. Okay, tell me your fear stories and let's get them out of the way. Right.
Yeah.
It sounds like a more difficult process. What is your role in that process, and how does the life cycle of this look for somebody who's working with you?
It's a great question. So, I mean, it differs. I don't have like a process, a set agenda. Like
Hmm.
I used to be super process oriented, or well, relatively process oriented, very planned and structured in my work at Google. And now I go into every call completely unprepared because I know I'm actually prepared no matter what. I can handle whatever is going to come. And so, what I always say to every client is, it doesn't. There's no topic that's off the table, because the thing is, no matter what topic we're talking about, it's all the different doors into the same deeper stuff.
Right.
And so we don't realize it, but we're playing out the same patterns in our personal lives, in our professional lives, in our family lives, and all these places. And so, what the way it typically looks is that, especially for like, I'll give you an executive for as an example. An executive I'm working with is talking about how she is launching a new business plan to her organization, and we start talking about what's holding her back from actually taking action, or how she's procrastinating on writing the email, or how she's looking, and all of that stuff. There's the surface, power through it and just get past it.
Right.
And then there's the deeper stuff of, why does this keep happening? What is it that we're actually butting up against? Because what we tend to look at as human beings, especially in the workforce, when we want to make a change, we look at the tactical things that we need to do differently. Well, what are the new skills? What are the new habits I need to develop? Um, and that's great, but that's actually only about 20% of the issue. The other 80% is the mindset that keeps us stuck in those habits and doing those things in the same way we're doing them. And so, if we don't look at the mindset that is causing the behavior, then you'll just see it repeating itself over and over again. And so, when we go into the mindset and look at, well, what's yucky about that? Like, what's the most dangerous thing about sending an email that's not totally fleshed out, or that you may not have vetted with 10 people or whatever? What we tend to come up with is, well, people will think I look stupid. Okay, what's bad about looking stupid? Well, if I look stupid, then people will think I'm a failure. They won't trust me. And so when we get down to these deeper levels, it is always about an identity that we think we need to hold on to. Some way that we believe we need to show up in this world that we're so deeply attached to. And if we don't show up this way, then we risk no longer belonging. We risk our worthiness. And so when we can detach ourselves from that fear story, then it becomes so much better. Like, okay, great. So I sent an email that, maybe not everybody loved, and some people might disagree with it, but it doesn't impact my worthiness.
Right.
It just impacts this one thing.
Right now, and I'm sure that that so many people who will be watching this are can resonate, either on the micro level or the macro level with the things that you're describing here. What are some tangible things that the average person can do to help get over these fears, or at least try to embrace them and understand that they exist?
Yeah. So what I always encourage anybody, whether we all have, well, most of us have goals, things that we want to accomplish, whether it's losing weight, or it's taking on a new role, or it's, just making more time for yourself, or creating more balance in your work schedule. So whatever the goal is, think about that goal, and then ask yourself, what are the things I'm doing that do not support me actually accomplishing that goal? So for instance, I'll say balance work schedule. Most of us overachievers tend to, like, create a lot more time on our work than we do, making time for our families. Well, what am I not doing? Well, I'm checking email first thing in the morning. I am emailing people back on the weekends. I'm sending emails late. I'm working on decks in the weekend. Whatever all of those things are, then we have to start asking ourselves, what if I didn't do any of that stuff? What would that make me feel? How would I feel about that if I just stopped? If I actually just did what I wanted to do and actually just created balance? What is yucky about that actual feeling?
Mhm.
And what we tend to realize is, oh, well, I have to do that, because what would people think if I didn't reply back to them? They might think that I'm ignoring them, or they might think that I'm not trustworthy, or they might question my ability to do the work, or whatever it is. And again, as we get to those deeper layers, we start to see some of the identity related things.
Mhm.
And when we start to see what those identity related fears are, then we start to see how that's keeping us really stuck. And so it's always like asking yourself, what is yucky about, or scary or uncomfortable about dropping all of the things I'm doing that keep me safe?
Definitely. Are there some higher level trends that we're observing as the workforce is dramatically changing, and obviously things are becoming more and more competitive as the time goes by? I believe that that most recently, the at least in Silicon Valley, the number of years that somebody spends in a tech company is about 2 3 years, which I think just adds on to the stress levels of continuously to improve and to gain to new heights, even though it's not something that we might be actually passionate about. Are there some higher level trends that you're observing, or that we should be worried about or optimistic about?
Well, what I am observing, to I'll speak specifically to what you just mentioned, is this idea that we need to keep trading up and things will get better as we trade. Like, for instance, a lot of people that I worked with at Google left Google to go to competitors thinking it's going to be better. They had been at Google for a long time. It's going to be better when I go to this new place. And it didn't get better. It was the same thing with slightly different scenery.
Right.
And that's what people find over and over again. It doesn't matter, whether you're in tech or in other companies.
Right.
And so when we realize that the change doesn't come from the outside, that really is an invitation for us to go inside and again shift our mindset, because the
Right.
scenery is just may look a little bit different, but it's going to feel the same way as long as we keep those same mindsets. And I just think it's becoming more obvious, and I think people are starting to recognize some of their limiting habits and patterns, especially because we have this pressure cooker of being at home and talking on
Definitely.
Zoom and all the other stuff that's happening in the world right now.
Definitely. Erika, I want to thank you for being so generous with your time. This was wonderful. Before we leave, I have to ask you for 3 words that you would use to describe yourself.
Okay, I would say energetic,
Energetic.
probably really, really energetic. Um, let's see, divergent, and
Why divergent?
um, so I call it divergent because I used to think that like I needed to ignore the parts of me that didn't really fit in with the mold. And the more that I realized that, especially there are so many people that are high achievers and really intelligent people that think,
Right.
well, this part of me doesn't really make sense with the rest of me. And so many of us, when we give ourselves to actually give ourselves permission to be our full selves, we are way cooler people. And so I say I'm divergent because like I'm highly spiritual and I have a very perverted sense of humor. I used to think those two things could not work together, but they very much do because they're part of me. Or, I love intense workouts, and my favorite thing to do is sit outside and do nothing all day.
I love it.
So yeah, I'm very divergent. And the third would be passionate.
I love it. Okay, Erica, thank you so much. This was insightful and wonderful, and best of luck on the journey. And thank you for being very open and honest about your own journey.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm really, really thrilled to have been here. Best of luck to you as well.
Take care.